Hi, it's Patty with Giddy Things. Welcome back. Instead of having motivational goal setting at the highlight as the highlight of tonight's video, what I'm going to do instead is tell you a sleep story. I think we all sometimes fall asleep better when someone is speaking calmly to us and telling us a bedtime story. And the one that I want to share with you, and my eyes are really heavy too, you can probably tell, is one I told myself the other night about being at my grandparents'. I do that. Do you ever do that in your mind where you tell yourself a story or relive a memory or maybe even sing to yourself in order to get relaxed and fall asleep? Well, that's what I do sometimes. And it depends on the night what it is that comes to mind. Sometimes I make up fictional stories to make myself fall asleep or help me fall asleep. And this particular story is about the times that I would spend at my grandparents'. I only knew 2 of my grandparents. My mom and dad had me later in life after having had a whole separate set of kids beforehand, and I was a little girl when my dad's parents, my grandma and papa, passed away. My grandma and papa, though, were very sweet and instrumental in my life. I was only about 7 when they went to heaven, but I remember so well the lovely times that we spent when we would go down in Louisiana to see my grandma and papa. And one of the things that was so exciting is the transition that I would make nearly every night from a pallet on the floor to a better place to sleep. And I want to share that with you. So if you get really comfortable, sort of relax. If you need a drink of water or something, go ahead and have that. If you need something to eat, get good and comfy so that you can fall asleep with the story if you'd like. So we're in Louisiana. It's the 1970s, and my grandma and papa did not have a really modernized house. They had only recently gotten an indoor plumbing situation, and they also had only recently gotten some modern conveniences like a hot water heater. They had in one big wall, it seemed so large to me because I was little, a big fireplace, and it was exciting to me to be in a place where we had a fireplace because where we lived as a family in Louisiana was kind of far away from my grandparents, and we had to go further down south to see them. And our house was kind of in a working class subdivision where my parents owned a house that my mom and her mom had bought in the 1940s together. And it was always exciting because we didn't have a fireplace. We didn't, it wasn't then really what it is now. Whoever is living there, a really old house. And so my grandma and papa had quite an old house and this big fireplace. And a lot of the cousins, who were quite a bit older than I, like to sleep on pallets. Now, if you're not from the South, I wonder if they call it the same thing in other places. A pallet on the floor is just a collection of covers that someone puts on the floor for you to make a little bed, make it soft, and you'll have a pillow most of the time. And I would be situated far enough away from the fire not to be too close and get too hot, but I could feel its warmth and I could hear it crackle. And it was a perfect environment to go to sleep in. However, a lot of the time I did not stay there. I loved to fall asleep on the pallet, and that's what the big kids were doing, and that's what I wanted to do. But often I would waken in the night. I have to confess, I've always been something of a night owl anyway, and I sort of come awake at night. My daddy used to say, if you hoot with the owls at night, you cannot soar with the eagles at dawn. And he certainly was an eagle. But my mom and I were more owls. In fact, my mother used to tell a funny story about when my daddy was working nights, which was kind of difficult for him, but he did it for, oh my gosh, I think 25 years at a newspaper. He was a stereotyper. I have so much more to share about my parents with you, but that's for another night. And Mama would be awake and Daddy would say, "Make sure you get enough sleep. Don't stay up too late." And she would hear him drive in, and she would run through the house to pretend that she'd been in bed, and Daddy could hear that. He said he could hear the thud, 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 thud coming down from outside in the house, and he would just laugh because my mom and dad really didn't try to change each other ever. They just tried to take care of each other and accept each other as they were. And that was the way it was with my grandma and papa too. My papa was a really quiet man, but he was a very sweet papa. And my grandma was everybody's dream of a grandma. She was a tiny, sort of fluffy lady who was really soft and comfortable, and she always smelled so delightful. There's a powder that isn't around much anymore, and it's not really all that safe to use, I don't think, but there's also a soap that you can find still in some vintage places called Cashmere Bouquet, and it was really popular in Louisiana. And my grandma used all the Cashmere Bouquet products, and she would have a little perfume on, something just a tiny little bit. She didn't want to be, um, she's a very, very dignified lady in some ways, and she didn't want to be loud or out there with things, but she loved makeup and perfume and powders and soaps and bath salts. In fact, when my daddy first moved away from home to go out into the wide world and find his first career, he used to send my grandma home what he called pretty up money so that she could buy the things that she liked to have and not have to worry about spending money that was coming in as income for them. And that was one of the many things that he did for his mom. He really, really loved her, and she certainly deserved it. And so she would have me on this pallet, and she would kiss me goodnight and tuck me in on all sides. If you haven't had that feeling lately, you don't have to have a grandma to tuck you in. Anyone you love and trust can tuck the covers around you and give you a little kiss on the forehead and make you feel nourished, right? We all have an inner child that stays a little child forever, and that child needs the warmth and encouragement and love that any child needs. You're always all the ages that you've ever been. One of my heroes, Mr. Rogers, says something to that effect. That's not a direct quote, but says something to that effect. And so you have to be careful with that inner child, and you have to protect that inner child. This is especially true if nobody ever has really done that for you as a child. You can parent yourself. And one of the ways that you can do this is through sleep stories like this, even if they're completely fictional, right? This one happens to be based on truth. I'm on the pallet, and Grandma is bustling about still, and I can hear the murmur of the adults talking to each other and low chuckles of laughter as they're trying to let the kids go to sleep. And that always made me feel so safe to know that there were adults who were capable of taking care of me, who were awake when I was going to sleep. It just made me feel so cared for. Now, I have to admit, I was also a little girl who liked to listen to the stories that the adults told. It's probably why I have so many of my family's stories in my soul, is because they thought I was asleep. They tell the good stories, if you know what I mean. So anyway, I would be on the pallet, and eventually, of course, I would drift off to sleep. Typically, I would have a glass of water and a half an apple as a bedtime snack. That's something that my mom started for me, and Mama was really good about all these routines. And so at some point during the night, I was going to wake up and either um, need to use the restroom. I'll leave it to your imagination how we did that before the indoor plumbing, but it was what everybody did. Or I would wake up and just be wakeful because, again, night person. And at the time, of course, I didn't know that I had an attention difference. But later on, I would find that out, and that can, also affect your ability to sleep comfortably. So, and throughout the night for sure. So I would wake up and I knew this was going to happen. My grandma knew this was going to happen at some point in the night. I was going to walk my little feet across the floor and knock, knock, knock very softly on my grandma's door. My grandma and papa, when we were staying with them especially, had separate bedrooms. And at this point in their lives, they were in their late 60s and early 70s, and papa could be wakeful at night and didn't want to disturb grandma. So she would be in a room sleeping in their house. It was a small room, really, but she had most of the room taken up by a big feather bed. Keeping in mind that my grandparents really didn't use grocery stores, they didn't really use clothing stores that much. They mostly made everything that they wore, and everything that they ate was the fruit of their own labor. And so that ability to do that meant that grandma also made her feather bed, and it was one she'd had for a long time, and it was made with duck down, with duck feathers. And I can remember hearing just very softly her saying, "Yes, baby." And I would open the door, and I know she'd been expecting it, and say, "Grandma, can I sleep with you?" And she would say, "Of course." And I would go into that feather bed, and I cannot describe the joy and the warmth that I found there with my grandma. It smelled delightful just the way that she did. A little bit of vanilla, a little bit of cashmere bouquet, and whatever perfume she liked at the time. Maybe it was Windsong, which is a perfume that we used to have that wasn't very expensive, but it smelled nice. And I would climb into bed, my little feet hanging out of whatever I happened to be wearing, which was probably going to be a cute nightgown that Grandma had given us if we were there at Christmas, especially. She would give us girls a nightgown and some fuzzy, fuzzy slippers. If I can find pictures of the slippers, I will link them below because I don't think they make slippers like this anymore, but I'm going to go search. I can't make any promises. But I would get into bed with her, and I'd have my little flannel nightgown on, and I would cuddle up. And the feeling of her, I have a tactile memory of how she felt as I curled up into her arms to go to sleep with the feather bed kind of closing comfortably, not claustrophobically around us. And the complete feeling of safety and being loved is one of the greatest gifts I can possibly imagine. And she gave me that gift. There was no way that I needed to change, to be different, to be loved by her. She loved me just as I was. And if she felt that I was a little restless in my sleep, would hum to me, usually hymns. She was the pianist at her church, and she knew hundreds of the old style hymns, and she would hum those to me. I had been raised knowing them, so sometimes I would join in and fall asleep. But I almost fought falling asleep because I wanted to enjoy the feeling of being there with my grandma and just the presence and the warmth of her and her love. So I would almost fight going to sleep, which to this day I still do, only it's a different presence of love in my life now. But I just remember that feeling so very well because the whole world seemed to revolve around the fact that I needed to go to sleep and get some rest. And she had this wonderful way about her of just sort of muttering to you. If she wasn't humming, just muttering sweet words. "Go to sleep, baby. You're safe, baby. Sweet dreams, baby." That absolutely was stronger than any possible chemical way to fall asleep that I can think of. What an incredibly blessed life I'm continuing to lead. And a lot of that is also because You're in my life. I love the idea of your falling asleep with this story and having wonderful, restful sleep like a little baby tucked in your grandma's arms. Again, if you've never known that feeling, I hope this story helps you to realize what that must feel like. Because again, you can be that person for your inner child. You may decide as you fall asleep to talk to that inner child. Say things that are things you would like to have heard or that you did hear when you were a child. I'm proud of you. I love you. I'll take care of you. Nothing is going to harm you. I'm going to be here. Just rest knowing that somewhere a higher power is awake and watching out for you throughout the night. In the meantime, once you've gone to sleep, make sure to go in peace tomorrow in a new day to love and to serve others. Night night.